Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Trusker, your host and committee chair. I'm happy to announce that I have been named committee chair again um, for this year. It is 2025. We are at now in April. We are a little bit past April 1st, so no April fooling, but we are excited to resume our monthly schedule where we do interviews and a couple of agenda items. So I just wanted to welcome we did get another member, which I'm always excited to see. So, Brad Thurman, welcome. That was the latest. Marianne Cullinan, who was one of our guests last month, actually joined as well, which I think I had mentioned. So, Brad is new. So, welcome, Brad. So, as we mentioned, had a committee meeting. So, we're trying to do quarterly committee meetings. And so we have a new committee, which we're excited about, a new board. So the board has met, and we did meet on last week, and we'll have notes from that. David Million's on the board as well, and look for his notes in the latest newsletter. So you'll see more coming from that. So we're excited about that, and we're going to try and keep that up. So this is new. We're going to try and make sure the board meets quarterly. So that's it for our latest and greatest news, other than to just, as always, please make sure you follow us on Facebook, in our LinkedIn group. If you haven't joined the Google group, you can do that as well. And obviously, look at the newsletter. I'll tell you that the board had some really exciting ideas. It's not my place right now to share all of them. David will do that. But we are looking to shake things up, including this format. We've been doing this for several years. So we are looking at changes to this format as well as meeting in person, which we really hope to do. So lots of exciting things down the road, but we will talk about that in future calls and future communications. What the much more exciting part of this conversation, however, is to talk to Mark C. Carnes of Barnard College, professor of history. Mark, welcome. I'm going to add you there we go. So now we're both on the screen. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
We're excited to have you. I have to admit, I think we actually worked with Adam. Adam Watson had listed a bunch of folks and a bunch of work, and I'm pretty sure that's how I found you in the context of this conversation. And we were citing some of the great things you were doing. It's one of those things that it's amazing we haven't talked earlier, because clearly you're a pioneer in a lot of this work. So I'm very excited to meet you formally and talk to you, and I appreciate you taking the time. We uh we always any conversation we have to really discuss all the work that you're doing is really start with the bridge of sort of your journey from whatever I don't know what's considered normal or baseline anymore, but it includes to the role playing conversation. So we'd love to hear, just to sort of introduce yourself, how you came into this space of using role playing as part of education. So anything you'd like to share on that journey would be a great intro, I think.
It's Thank you, Mike. That's a perfect introduction because if you had asked me um, back in 1990, the if you had suggested that at some point I'd be doing an interview on role-playing games, I would have been completely mystified. I'd have had no idea how we'd get from there to where we are at this moment. I was uh, in the 1990s, I was a very traditional historian, climbing the professional ladder. And I'd done fine. I'd gotten a tenure at Columbia and as chair of my department, and I'd had some successful books, and I was feeling very proud of myself. But then I dreaded going off to my class, and it was a class with I was a good teacher. I had excellent students. We were discussing classic texts, um, Plato, Confucius, Rousseau, the masterpieces of the human imagination, and I was bored.
Yeah.
Um, so how can that be? I, 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 and I felt in some ways that I had sort of accomplished what I'd sought to do professionally, but my classes were still boring. And so I remember this feeling, this palpable feeling, being bored going to a seminar. And at the end of that seminar, at the end of that semester, I sent an email to all of the students in that seminar, and I said, I'd like to meet with you individually to discuss what went wrong with the seminar. And so the next semester, I talked individually with the students. And after the third student told me that that seminar was her favorite, I said, how can that be? I was bored. You were bored. You could feel the boredom in the room. And she looked up at the books in my office and she said, well, yes, but all classes are sort of boring. Yours was less boring than most. And that resonated with my undergraduate experience too. My classes were all sort of boring. Some were less boring than others. So this is a long story, but I'll make it very short. So the next year, I decided I would try to convert this class on great books into debates. And so we did, the first one was, instead of a discussion of Plato's Republic, we did a trial of Socrates, and that's been done. It was fine. It was as good as the discussion experiences. Then the next sort of simulation was set in Ming, China, and it was a debate over the succession of the Wanli emperor. The emperor is, and according to Confucian protocol, the emperor is supposed to name his firstborn son as heir and successor. And this emperor didn't want to do that. So the game sort of replicated that dynamic. And the student who had the role of emperor and first grand secretary were trying to subvert the Confucian precepts. They conducted the class, and at one point they sort of took control of the class. I didn't mean for them to take control of the class, but they did. And at one point they threatened to exile students from the room who didn't do what they had ordered. And other students said, the emperor, can't do that, can she? And I didn't know what to say. And I said, well, of course the emperor can. He has life, death authority over everyone in the realm. So what happened then is that the debate within 20 minutes began to change its tone. It became deeper and as more intense, and it became alive. In the next class, it was even more so. Now, I sort of tried to get into the conversation and the debate and join in because I'm the teacher, right? But I saw that as I was speaking, it was sort of getting in the way of the world that they were creating. So I sort of moved my desk back from the table, and they didn't notice. And then the next class, the debate was just magical, and I didn't say a word. And they didn't notice that now I was at the back of the room. And someone at the end of the class said, do you realize this class was supposed to end 11 minutes ago? And people looked at their watches and looked up at the clock. And it was like that moment in a movie, at the end of the movie, when the lights come on and you're a little bit embarrassed that you've been so fully transported someplace else. And that's when it happened. They had been transported someplace else. And in that moment was some magic. And I then wrestled with the dilemma, which was clearly when the students were running the class and taking on their roles in a very serious way, something very special was going on. Problem was they didn't know anything. So how could they run the class if they don't know anything? And I realized that if we could thicken the roles and thicken the game context so that the classroom became like a mansion where the content of the class was the furniture and the decorations and the whole environment, and you push the students into that mansion and motivate them to explore it, there would be magic there. And that's been exactly the experience, creating these mansions of knowledge and then motivating students. How do you motivate them? You guys know how to motivate them. There's competition is motivation. Taking on a new identity, make believe is motivation. It's just magic. And using these motivational devices will cause them to explore that room, try to figure things out, compete, try to solve problems. And so each of these reacting games, and then now there are some 250 of them in development. 40 of them have been published, are these elaborate mansions that represent the ideas and the historical contexts of different moments. And students then have roll sheets. Some roll sheets are a couple of pages. Some of them are 7,000 words long. Um, and the idea is that they will lose themselves in exploring those mansions that are built in the past. And that's been the idea. It's been called Reacting the Past. I developed it in those classes. It then began to spread by word of mouth to other professors. It's now used at some 700 colleges and universities around the world. Um, there are, as I say, 40 published games and published by the University of North Carolina Press. The games are published, all students use the same game book, but then they download their roll sheets and the instructor downloads the instructor's manual because there are lots of secrets and stuff. You can imagine that. And
Mhm.
they get that from the Reacting Consortium website. So that's sort of how reacting works. In a nutshell, that's how I got involved. Was this one game that took off, that other faculty heard about it, and then it spread by word of mouth. The past 5 years, reacting has moved to high schools, to prisons, to senior programs, senior citizen programs, and it has this core of probably 700 or 800 professors and instructors for whom this has become a passion. And that I'd be part of this, I could never have imagined in that class that went off the rails in Ming, China.
It's funny because there's a lot of parallels if you've ever heard the story of the original Dungeons and Dragons and how it came about. It was originally a war game. And at the time, one of the creators sort of did very similar. Like instead of let's moving pieces on the board, let me have you play the roles. And the game completely went off the rails, but was magical because people were very much invested in their roles that only had the roughest sketch of who they were supposed to be. And it is interesting because, of course, as you absolutely captured, role play is really very powerful. It's just it's a powerful learning experience. It's a completely different muscle. It's funny. I recently did CPR training, and I'm working Saturday. I'll be going to wilderness survival training, and it is quite the difference when you've got sort of quizzes and it's X, Y, Z versus the physical component where you are actually going through role play and experiencing it. You don't forget that stuff. So it is really amazing the differences. But what I want to double click on here is I don't I think you're doing yourself a little disservice because you're talking about this amazing thing, and then we sort of went to this amazing massive what is essentially a movement, right? That the CAR-PGA is quite familiar with. But we there certainly I've interviewed a lot of folks and we're continually frustrated by everyone who experiences this gets it, and then it's not the norm, right? And I'm not saying it has to be the norm, right? There are lots of barriers, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on certainly look, I'd say it's a revolution, the reacting consortium, but love to hear your thoughts on sort of what is it? Both, you know, creating consortium is a big jump from, hey, this worked in my classroom. So I'd love to hear that. And then what are the challenges to growth for this kind of new form, not new, but new form of education?
You know, at, at the outset, I had no intention to build anything. I wanted to improve my classes, and what I saw was that if I needed to create the structures that would be thick enough because the students didn't know the stuff, but they had to run it. So that meant that basically you had to create a thorough game that would embed all of the knowledge in the roles and put it together. And I applied for a grant from, um, it was called the Fund for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education. And they were basically funding online learning. That was their big innovation that they were supporting. But they saw this as a different in-class sort of idea, and they decided to support it. What I wanted was I wanted to hire some scholarly specialists to help thicken my particular games. And I developed 6 games that first year because I needed them one game a month per semester for my classes. So, but I wasn't a specialist in Ming China, and I wasn't a specialist in the French Revolution or Independence India or the games that I chose for because they're intellectual collisions that were so exciting. But I wanted to bring in scholarly specialists to help me improve the games over the next couple of years, and they gave me the money for that. And that's all I really wanted was to improve my games. And but at the end of the 3-year period, the program officer says, "Well, you've got to do something for dissemination." I says, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, you've got to invite people and tell them what you've done. That's part of this grant process." And I'd spent all the money, so I didn't have any money for dissemination. So a group of the students who were in my classes really formed the core of this conference we set up, and they worked cheaply, and they loved the experience of these games. And we decided we'd have faculty come and play the games, and administrators, and and provosts and the like. And there was a moment in the planning where these students, we'd sent out all the invitations. We had some 60 faculty and administrators from different colleges coming to experience this, and we're going to play 2 different games. And one of the students says, what if the faculty don't get it? I mean, when I think of the faculty I know, they don't have the suppleness, the whimsy to do role playing. Maybe role playing is something that's age specific, like language. Maybe they're going to come and just sit around and look at each other. And I thought of faculty meetings, and I thought, my God, they might be right. This might be a disaster. But I didn't know what to say. So it began, and they were in 2 different classrooms. And at the coffee break, the students who were in the other classroom came running up to me and they said, they get it. They get it quicker than we got it, which was exactly what I'd seen too. That this role playing is you guys know this, but they didn't know it. I didn't know it. That the faculty had come to it were deeply suspicious and skeptical. And some of the big proponents of reacting had come to that because their provost had forced them to come to see what was going on. And uh, so that began the process of it spreading. And there were more conferences, and then it spread by word of mouth. And I thought it was going to be easy. I thought that this was a revolution that was obvious, that people were drawn to it, the experience of playing a game for the faculty who came, they were nervous, they were skeptical, and many of them became great enthusiasts. And that built this whole community that caused it to spread. But then when they took it back to their colleagues, they encountered just tremendous skepticism. So what has happened at institution after institution, college after college, high school after high school, is there's been a phalanx of reacting faculty enthusiasts who say, we've come across something that is transformative, it changes our classrooms, it does all sorts of things you and your group well understand. Um, and most of the faculty say no, no. College is about work. It's not about play. Students don't know anything, so how can they run the classes? My students don't talk, so they won't speak I know they won't speak in these game situations. I'm a serious scholar. I want to do what my mentor did, and that was lecture. And I don't want to give up control to a bunch of idiots who don't know what they're doing. So we've been fighting these battles at college after college, university after university. And when I say that reacting is used at 700 colleges and universities, it's absolutely true. And there's usually a node of faculty who are the great enthusiasts. They're supported by the
Hmm.
administrators who are concerned that so many students are dropping out of college because they're bored to tears, and
Right.
they're charging lots of money and the students are bored to tears. So the administrators and the college presidents are encouraging innovation. They're excited to hear about classes that students are doing all sorts of interesting things and are excited and are talking to their parents about it, who are learning leadership skills and communication skills and speaking persuasively and all these sorts of things that their trustees are demanding of them they can't deliver. So we've got these nodes of faculty, often supported by administrators, but tremendous resistance among faculty and often among students themselves. Students, when they've got a choice of taking this strange class, will be taking on roles and they'll have to speak and they'll be doing weird things and they've heard about it. They've heard how it's taken over students' lives, or they can sit in a classroom and do what they've always done and sort of not pay much attention, but they know what to do to pass the exam and it won't get in the way of their lives. So that's the battle we've been fighting. We've had these victories, but we have not transformed American higher education. We've got this activist node within
Hmm.
hundreds of colleges throughout the world uh, with passionate adherents supporting us and supporting the concept and advancing it and making it better. And this sea of ignorant disinterest, ignorant in the sense that when they're invited to come to a reacting class, they don't want to see it. They know that it's got to be boring and it's got to be a failure. They know in their heart of hearts it can't work, so they don't want to go and even see it. So that's why I say it's ignorant. So you've got this sort of sea of skeptical ignorance standing for the traditional values of higher education or of the high school classroom increasingly, and this activist phalanx of venturesome faculty. And it's a tremendously fun and exciting battle. Fun because the people who are making the argument for change, for expanding the notion of what learning is in this activist way, um, we feel that we're winning it on its merits. The other side doesn't like lecturing a lot. They'll do everything they can to get a leave because, well, it's boring and it's exhausting, and often even a good lecture flops. I give lectures every semester. I sort of wish I hadn't, but my department, I've got a big lecture at Columbia, and they insist that I do it. Um, and I can give a very good lecture and it can still flop. It's just, if the campus has been busy with something else or there's a big, it's a lecture is like a so-so movie script. It's, you can deliver it well and it still can flop. Usually they're just not very good though. So, um, but that's our experience. And forgive me for giving a lecture in defense
No, I
of
love it.
not lecturing.
That's no, that's fantastic. And sort of, so certainly we've heard this. We've had several educators who are really attempting to do what you're doing and attempting, I think, like the revolution. I love that, it is sort of these battle by battle, school by school. The things we hear, the two things that have come out, right? And you hit on both of them. One of them is fun play sounds like not serious education, right? So that's the one you get a lot of that resistance. Sometimes you get it from parents. A lot of times you get it from educators who are just concerned about that there's not a retention or that it can't track in a way that is within educational standards, right? So we see that a lot. It's sort of, well, okay, fine, but there's still a test or there's still some measure. And the other piece we see a lot is time, where certainly, if you look at role playing, Dungeons and Dragons, all that stuff, a lot of that was always, hours and hours, right? So and then you're condensing and condensing, condensing. And I think clearly it absolutely can be a format where it is not a 10-hour dialogue. It is broken up fitting the classroom time. But it is interesting because those are the two we've heard most often are the response. One is a logistical puzzle that I think is solved. Clearly, you've solved, frankly. The other is this sort of really cultural embedded issue with, in some cases, what we've seen some of the educators that are members of the CAR-PGA just reframe it. If you don't call it role play and you call it immersive education or something, People go, great, sounds good. That sounds very serious. I'm ready. So I mean, and I think in some ways that is exactly the approach, right? The reacting consortia. I love that. That sounds way more. We're not just going to say we're going to game and you're going to have fun and you're going to learn. You really are taking it in a way that I think fits the language and the culture, hopefully making it more compatible. But I'm curious at your experience. So, because like, to your point, there's these sort of skirmishes, usually from a passionate group who clearly feels there's value. How do they win?
We don't have a lot of wins, to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Um, the where we're winning is we're attracting more and more people, and we're taking more and more institutions are attracting people at those institutions, and the people at those institutions then manage to find a coterie of like-minded faculty. But then when they try to get a curricular vote to say create a whole program, um, the majority faculty will nearly always overrule them. So you've got
Mm.
these repeated battles that we are where someone says we want this sort of game, these types of games to fulfill this major curricular requirement. Those big faculty-wide curricular battles, we rarely win them. Um, But what I say to the faculty after losing these things is that we're the ones who are having fun in the battles. It's like when Galileo was arguing that the Earth moves, um, he would have a habit of expressing the oppositional viewpoint and saying, "What you mean to say is this," and he'd then frame the argument that the Earth doesn't move, and he'd frame it much better. And he said, "Is this really what you mean?" And his interlocutors would say, "Yeah, that's it exactly. And you can't possibly refute that." And then he'd proceed to show why that argument that he had framed so brilliantly was dead wrong. And he would humiliate the people that he was debating. And his friend, Galileo's friend, said, "Don't do that. You're humiliating powerful cardinals and people like that. Just don't do it." And Galileo couldn't help himself because he was having so much fun. Um, And there's a lot of that funness to these debates that the faculty are making these arguments. Come to the class. If you don't believe it, you don't believe that students can speak and run a class, come and see my class. No, I don't want to do that. Why not? We are in the business of research, of investigating things, of challenging eternal truths and verities, right? That's what higher education is about. And you don't want to come and investigate something. In fact, the learning research shows that lectures don't work and that students forget most of what they've been lectured within 3 weeks, if not earlier. So there's all this, the learning research shows that the conventional ways of teaching don't work very well. That's the research goes back 45, 50 years. It's solid, it's irrefutable. And yet here educators, people who are professional professors who are in a business of research, refuse to look at the research on learning in their own fields. Instead, no, I want to do the way it's always been done. I want to hold to tradition. Okay, I don't. So we have these battles. We don't have the big university-wide, okay, we're going to have this role-playing game fulfill this major curriculum that 8,000 students have to take a semester. But over the course of 20 years in all these institutions, we've had certainly over 1 million students play role-playing games. So we've had these, what I think of as substantial victories. We've got this institutional node, we've got this spread, and it's out there. There's a bubbling ferment. There's a sense that a knowledge that traditional pedagogies are not very good. For a long time, the alternative was online learning. Well, we've all been exposed to Zoom learning, and we see it's not the solution.
Yep.
Um, so what's next? And we're bubbling out there. I think that they're going to find us. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it's going to happen. I think.
I
And
feel
we're
like we're
having the fun,
close.
and the others aren't.
I feel like we're close. Um, so one of the huge tools, I'm trying not to make this constantly about battles. One of the huge tools is Minds on Fire, your book. So tell us about that. It sounds like in some ways it's the distillation of what we're talking about, but I'd love to hear more on
You know,
Minds on Fire.
this was this was going to be an easy project. Okay, so I had this concept. I hadn't really thought it out as coherently as I've tried to express it to you. It came to me in pieces over the courses of a decade, beginning in the late 1990s. But by 2010, there are now uh, hundreds of faculty are using it, and they're telling me these wonderful stories. They say they love reacting. They've taken the idea much further than I had. This community of venturesome faculty exposed to a whole new paradigm of learning, created new games of great new ideas for developing this in different ways that I couldn't have conceived of much of it. So the idea is expanding exponentially. And I have all of these anecdotes, and I decided I'm going to take all of these great anecdotes. Let me just give you one that I begin the book with. It was from a professor at Barnard College, and he was just trying reacting, and he's using decided to use the French Revolution as the game, as the last game of the last experience in his traditional class. And so the last month of the class on your European history was going to be the French Revolution game. But the debates ended up being longer than he had planned. And he announced to the class, he said, we're not going to be able to finish the game here. We've got another uh, 5 or 6 sessions, and the semester is going to end before we can finish the game. And the students said, well, let's meet. Let's have another session after class. But they had other classes after the one that this was being held in. And the instructor said, well, if you can come up with a time where we can all can meet, then I'll arrange to come too, to help you run the final 4 game sessions. The class met at 9 o'clock. They decided they'd meet at 8 o'clock, that the class would begin at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the final 4 sessions, they all came, perfect attendance, college students at 8 in the morning, okay, for the final four
Wow. Yeah.
sessions. Okay, so that's the sort of story anecdote that I could take these anecdotes and build my book around it. And I said, okay, so I've got my anecdotes, I can fit them into different chapters, and then I'll take the classics of educational theory. Plato, who said that the way you learn is by play. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who said the way you learn is by play. John Dewey, the way you learn is by play. And I said, okay, so what I'll do is I've got my anecdotes, and then I'll just use all of these quotes and accounts from the classics and tie them together. A easy book, right? The problem was when I started reading Plato and Rousseau and Dewey more carefully, they said there are lots of ways to play, but there are bad ways to play.
Mm.
And role playing is a bad way to play. It Plato says it gives people a false sense of their powers. It's like when they go to the theater, they imagine that they're gods and heroes, and then they get out of their proper station. Their imaginations catch fire, and they stop thinking coherently. Rousseau says that the challenge is you want students to grow up thinking only their own thoughts, to have their own true, authentic self. But if they start reading books, they'll identify with heroes. And if they see plays and the like and reading books, they'll start imagining there's somebody else. And if they start imagining there's somebody else, then they won't be their true, authentic self. And Dewey says something that the task of education is to have the immigrant masses fit into an industrial society. And so, yes, they should play, but they should play by, you can give girls brooms and boys shovels, and they can learn tasks as kids that will help them as adults. But we don't want them fooling around. We don't want them having, so the classic theorists on education said, we want play, but we don't want play that's really fun. And so generations of educators trying to follow Plato and Rousseau and Dewey have tried to come up with sober, boring tasks and call them play, and they don't work. And so then the word gets out, playing doesn't work in teaching. The problem is the plays that have been proposed by Plato and Rousseau and educators haven't been any fun. And partly because they've abandoned role playing because they've sought for different reasons. They've said it's dangerous. It makes people to engage in imaginative excess. It causes them to lose their coherent sense of authentic self, um, or they'll just get lost in silliness. What you and I and your members know is that there's learning in getting out of yourself. In fact, that may be the only way to learn. Otherwise, if you say that what I am and what I think now is the truth, then you can never learn anything. You've got to open yourself up to new ideas. You've got to read. You've got to expose yourself to other people's. And to understand them, you've got to give up your own self and embody and live in their minds. That's learning, that's education. And we've got this profound tradition in Western education, which has gone the other direction, which has said, don't go towards this motivational gold mine. It's too dangerous. Well, the alternative is ignorance. So it seems to me. And that's the argument I made in the book. It was the intellectual challenge of my life was to take on those big theorists in education and to discover what you and your community know in their hearts, that there is imaginative and educational gold in these experiences.
That's, I mean, I think you summed up the it's a daily battle, right? We've often talked about gamers going undercover, right? So people they cover in lots of ways. You hope you're able to bring your true self. And one of my favorite examples is, would you ever mention that you play role-playing games on your resume? And how would that be reacted to? And some people have said absolutely that, there's people, if I said that I was a game master, I had done these things, people would be thrilled because they'd say, these are all these skills that I think would be valuable. And there's plenty of people who say, if you say that, I would never hire you. You sound like a frivolous, unserious person. And therefore, no, I would never. I'd be ashamed to mention that that's in any way there's some ethical value. Because again, it's not that it's not fun. It's not that it's not a hobby, but when taken out of context, that's not something you would say serious. And certainly that's a cultural battle that goes across all serious aspects of life. But to your point, I mean, certainly one of the things we talk about a lot is the rise of escape rooms and how they're used for team play. They're used to bond, and all that is role play, an intense role play situation with people together in a high stakes game where they have strangers often have to work together. And yes, it's not a secret that businesses and schools use that to team bond because boy, you don't forget things when there's a clock and you're trying to solve puzzles and working together. So really interesting stuff. Again, it's one of those things that if you experience it, I don't think there's ever a question. It's always this bigger movement, which has a lot of headwinds. And what it sounds like, and I think it absolutely, is clearly we have difficulty characterizing why this is a problem. I think people get it that there's challenges, and it sounds like you've really delved into that, which is fantastic. Ted, yes, go ahead.
Let me interrupt for a
Oh,
second.
sorry.
You'd
Go
asked
ahead,
for
Mark,
one
and then we'll let
example.
Ted.
You'd asked for one example of a victory. It turns out
Yes.
now that for jobs in higher education, for professorships, a fair proportion of them include they say it's knowledge of reacting to the past is a benefit. Okay, so this is now something that is helps you get a job in our education, and probably of the hundreds of faculty who are in this community, most of them end up winning their university's teaching prize because they have these great classes. So they've got credibility. We win these prizes, and now it's starting to show up in job ads that probably 10% of the job ads now say knowledge reacting to the past is necessary or is helpful
Wow.
for job applicants. So that's a nice
That's
victory.
huge. That's a huge victory. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Ted, did you have a question? So you raise your hand
Yeah, no, I
or
guess
comment.
a little bit of dissent. I suppose. Um, I'm not sure the escape room should be in the role playing category,
Mhm.
personally, because I've done a couple of them. You're not given a role to play. You're simply given puzzles to solve. Now, they've become popular, and tangentially they might be related to role playing, but I think they're a little bit different.
And I mean, fair. I don't think they're full tabletop by any stretch, but I do think when you have teams faced in an intense time crunch, working to solve a challenge, and a lot of times it's creative challenges, right? So one of the things we've done escape rooms with libraries, and the library is actually teaching you about a subject. So in other words, we actually had to use books in the library. I mean, it's amazing to me because it's one of those things, if you think about it, what a fantastic place to run an escape room, because hopefully you have the space and you have the resources. So we often had to consult books or other media to get out. And we love it's so funny. They sell out immediately whenever we have them at our local libraries. And by the way, Mark, we had talked earlier. Librarians are actually a huge group in the CAR-PGA as well. And it's amazing how much you learned because we had to look up rotations of planets, and that was one of the puzzles for us to solve. So, I think as always, there's elasticity to this, right? So it's what you learn versus the experience and the immersiveness of it. And I'll tell you, I've had bad escape rooms, Ted, where we got some people who were just not able to navigate that stuff. And I imagine, some of this is always there's people who get it, as Mark you've said, and there's people who have to sort of be brought along a little bit. So to that point, Mark, I'd love to hear your advice, right? So folks are going to look at this. I think some of them are probably pumping their fists. Certainly I am. I'm just not doing it visibly, but in absolute agreement saying this is what we've got to do. What's your advice to educators who they probably have some gaming background? They're probably anxious about this. They see the pedagogy, they're excited about it, but it's intimidating. It can be depending, right? And you're sort of gambling at sometimes because, as you said, people are coming together in groups. Where do you start? You want to do this, you think it'll work. What's your advice to folks like that who are just starting out and want to get involved?
So what I would suggest, and it's opened up a lot. Probably 4 years ago, we began opening it up to high school teachers, and so um, uh, to and plenty of teachers do reacting without ever playing a reacting game themselves. The main way that we've tried, the most successful way of disseminating it has been we've had conferences, regional conferences, online conferences. Our main conference is in New York in June, and people who would like to experience this, that's the thing to do. You go to the Reacting Consortium, just Google Reacting Consortium, and you'll find their website, and they'll find the details about the games that we'll be playing in New York from June 5th through 8th. And we send the roles. You choose which game you would want to learn, and a reacting game usually will unfold over between 2 weeks and 4 weeks, and we compress it for 2 days during the summer institute. You go to that, you'll get your roll sheet and the game books and stuff a month in advance, and you'd be assigned to teams, and you would spend 2 days playing one game. You'd be in a faction. It would be, you guys know what this would be like. Only this would be an intellectualized version of it, and then you play two games, and then you'll go to some discussion sessions on how do you do this in the classroom and things like that. So that's the best way to do it. They also have we just online experience. So we do the same thing via Zoom, where you get your game book and you get your role, and then you'll play a version of it, a Zoom version of it. And Zoom doesn't work for anything, but it works for reacting better than most things. I suppose you've done role-playing games on Zoom and found it's a hell of a lot better than a Zoom lecture, although it's not as good as getting together. So that's one way to do it, is to experience it. The other thing would be to join the Reacting Facebook community. And to do that, go to the Reacting Consortium site and indicate that you would like to join that community. And then that's a community of I think it's 2,900 um, teachers and administrators, including probably 150 high school teachers and others. And that's a discussion group. There's a lot of opposition to Facebook, but it's been a pretty good community and it works pretty well. And it's a good way to, you could learn um, an awful lot by just following and interacting with those conversations. And as I say, that you will find in that community a group of people at private high schools, a group of at public high schools, a group of people in Hawaii, a group of people in Finland. Different communities will connect with whatever your particular interest is. Some who are doing reacting in prisons, some who are doing it in senior centers. So that would be a good way to connect, is go to the Reacting Consortium. If you want to look at the published games, you can go to the University of North Carolina Press, and again, then just Google Reacting to the Past, University of North Carolina, and you'll find all of the game books. And the game book is part of a game, but you also have to have the roll sheets. And because those can't be public, because they're secrets and the like, and the instructor's manual's got secrets, you get that, you download them at the Reacting Consortium. But that too, you've got to prove that you're an instructor, because we don't want students to be able to go in and get their another student's roll sheet and break the game by knowing the secrets. So that's the sort of process. But that would be the way to connect, would be part of this community, and there will be someone who is like-minded and is doing the sort of thing all of your people in your community are doing.
It's fantastic. Yeah, and again, like I said, some of this is just systemizing it in a way that so people can engage, hopefully, because we know the enthusiasm's there. It's really connecting like-minded folks. And then if you have the path, and then of course, presumably, once you've got a lot of these materials and experience, you have to make the argument to your university or school, right? To do that. Is there a process in how that happens, or is it sort of,
Well,
hopefully
what
proves
happens
out?
yeah, what happens is that a venturesome faculty member has heard about it. They've had their antenna up, okay?
Hmm.
And they're not really happy with their classes, that the students are bored, okay? And they have their antenna up, they hear about this, and they've got enough stuff to reject their intuition, which is, this is not what higher education normally is. This is very different. And so they will find their way. Perhaps they've heard from a colleague, perhaps they've heard it from someone elsewhere in their discipline, and they then make their way to the consortium, and they make their way to the experience, and they try it out on their campus. And they're excited. They invite their provost to come to class, or their college president to come to class, and they're ecstatic. And quickly there surfaces a node of people around that we call it the campus champion, the person who begins the idea at their campus or at their school. And they will quickly find a group of supportive people, and almost always a group of at least one administrator who is excited by this new idea, where they're under tremendous pressure to do something different. And yet they also know that they can't lead from above. So when they encounter a faculty member who's trying to do this strong, innovative idea that the administrators have now all heard about reacting, and that now one of their colleagues wants to try it out, the administrator will give them carte blanche, usually. And so then that gives the momentum for this initiative on campus. Then there'll be a little phalanx of people that emerges around it, and then there'll be the big battles with the faculty later on. And those are hard.
For sure. And it is interesting because you've mentioned a few times where it's almost right place, right time. Climate has to be right, especially where universities are struggling if they're having dropout rates or students just not engaged.
But
Well,
there are, but in a way
here it
that
is.
it's been the right thing for a long time. And this was the other idea I had in my book, Minds on Fire, is that no one can point to a golden age of higher education when students were motivated. It turns out in the 1840s that students, all they cared about was their literary and dramatic societies. And the faculty and the administrators try to crush them because that's all the students want to do is they go, they have their literary competitions and their dramatic societies. And they actually build libraries in support of their literary and dramatic societies. And these become clubs that are part of Williams and these colleges. Many of the libraries of the literary and dramatic societies are bigger than the college libraries in the 1830s and 1840s because they want to do well in their literary competitions and and they're sustained by alumni. And the colleges try to stamp them out. And then the students just leave the college when they're stamped out. Then the literary societies die in the post-war Civil War period, replaced by fraternities, which are like the literary societies, but they've got these elaborate initiatives. Then comes football, which is in a way a role-playing game. You put on a uniform, you put in this space, you take on behaviors that you couldn't do in regular life, and it's tremendously powerful. And fraternity initiations and role-playing games and football, colleges try to stamp them out, and they can't. They're too powerful. Then you go to our day, the modern days, and you've got all of those. Plus, you've got video games and drinking games and stuff like that. Um, Students, and this is what I argue, that students, there's never been a golden age of education in America because students' minds have always been involved in what I call these subversive play worlds. And role playing is a big part of that subversiveness. Role playing games are subversive, which is part of why they're fun. And colleges have been trying to seize students' motivational energies in competition with video games and drinking games and fraternities and things like that. And they haven't been winning. They can't point to a time ever when this wasn't the case. And that's a big part of my book is this history of how higher education has lost out to these other motivational challenges. What was were your college years like? Where was your
Right.
mind at? Okay.
Yeah.
So uh, it's revolutionary, but it deals with a reality that goes way back. Forgive my another lecture.
No, that was, and that's huge. I think in some ways, like I say, it's the right place, right time. And it sounds like, and certainly I think the pandemic was a thunderclap that pushed a lot of buttons that probably made this, we're certainly seeing it in the role playing space, just more resurgent. People, life is short. People really did crave in person in ways that they hadn't before. Sadly, I feel like we're starting to forget everything we learned, but let's put that aside for a second. I do really think that, you know, we know some of this. I don't want to say it's broken. That's probably unfair, but we know some of this isn't as effective as it could be. And there's opportunity for sure, obviously, from everything you've spoken about. In a couple of minutes here, I wanted to throw it over to Ted.
Mike, can I
He's
throw one
one of our
more
guests.
observation out? Forgive me for
Yes,
interrupting.
and then we'll give it to Ted. Sure, go ahead.
And what the pandemic was important was that for 20 years, hundreds of billions of dollars had gone into the future of education, which was going to be online learning. That was the
Hmm.
tremendous, all the venture capitalists were going in there. And the pandemic showed it's not the solution. It's not the future of education. So you have several $100 billion of investment in online learning, and it didn't work. It's not the future. So where does all that investment capital go? What is the future? Because the old system hasn't worked very well either, ever. So my hunch is that somewhere people are going to be moving somewhere else, and somewhere that somehow that money is going to find a way to help energize this development. I'm sorry, Ted, I didn't mean to cut you out.
No, it's fine. So I came into this presentation late, so I may have missed some introductory remarks or whatever. But is this strictly or primarily centered on history classes, or are there other fields that this has been attempted with, or to some extent?
It began with history classes, then it moved to history and political science, then religion, then philosophy and art, and but uh, always for reacting to the past, these are situations that are set in the past. So the games in art history will talk about setting up a situation in the Parisian salons in the 1870s. But there are others in the reacting community who are taking reacting in different directions, and they're talking about reacting to the present, reacting to texts, reacting to different things. We have reacting games on climate change. Um, they don't really fit in the past, some of them. So there is this evolution that's moving forward into non-reacting modes. Exactly where that's going, I don't know, but there is a big part of the community, uh, probably a couple hundred people, who are trying to take reacting in different ways that are not just past focused. But we've moved far beyond the discipline of history, but most of the existing reacting games are set in the past, though they may be in disciplines ranging from physics to environmental science to art history to religion.
But okay, physics would be interesting. The reason I ask is, or kind of brought that up, is I work at the Georgia Institute of Technology. I work in video production where we're actually recording lectures on campus. And, it's all math. It's all equations, writing on the board. I'm not sure that a role-playing approach would necessarily go in with that, because it's just so math heavy.
Yeah, well, I've been I was interested in seeing if we could create a game on infinitesimals that would sort of look at the work of the Italians and then of uh, uh, just the emergence of calculus as scholars in the 1600s in Italy and then in England began to develop calculus. It was beyond me, but a mathematician and some others are working on that sort of game. Taking this into the world of math has been a real challenge, but it's something that some group of people are working on. I can't say they've surmounted it, but they are working on it, and they're trying to um, certainly come up with a game on the origins of calculus. Would that something that you would use in your classes? Probably not.
Well, I'm not a teacher. I just record the classes. Um, but I mean, if it can be used, that's great. I'm just not sure how a role-playing aspect would really fit in with, a hardcore engineering class.
Yeah, engineering is a different story. We've got a stronger team that's involved with engineering and using reacting and reacting concepts in engineering. The leader of that movement is Alan White, and I forget which institution he's at. Oh goodness, I should remember it. But he's leader of that sort of initiative.
Interesting. Well, the I guess ironic part is, um, you know, the kind of people that are going to be professors at a place like Georgia Tech are quote unquote nerdy types, which means there's a good chance they played D&D when they were young. And in fact, I know a couple instructors who did and still do play Dungeons and Dragons, and they're professors at an engineering school. So,
The person I mentioned is Alan White at the Rose Holman Institute of Technology, if someone wants to track him down.
yeah. Yeah, that was the gist of my question.
Excellent. Well, so Mark, we had Ted. Ted is one of longstanding members, which is fantastic. So this is amazing, Mark. We're all low key frustrated about how we know this works and how we can get it further. And you've been out here obviously doing this and leading a group who has followed your lead. I mean, it's interesting Ted mentioned because it was reacting to the past, but that's what it's called. It's reacting consortium. And I think there is a reason for that, which is that it is we always say, it's so funny how role playing is often been constrained. And you say, well, if you can imagine anything, theoretically you can apply it in so many different ways. So really exciting to see all this work. Thank you for everything you're doing. I think we should, for the moment, acknowledge the massive amount you've done for both education and for taking gaming seriously in a way that I think is seen as an alternative, right? Which we just don't get enough. Like I said, we get passion. We have plenty of passion. We're full of passionate volunteers, but putting it pen to paper, creating a structure is the long game, which is clearly the consortium's doing. It's clear that you did that, and as you said, it was a journey, right? I mean, it's funny when you look past at things, and we just summarized, probably large parts of your life's work in the span of about 10 minutes. But obviously there was a lot more work involved.
But what happened was there are lots of like-minded people who did some who did no who had done Dungeons and Dragons,
Hmm.
some who for whom this was a new experience but a very fun one. It was the infusion of hundreds of people into this new space that led to this development. It wasn't me. I was the beginner of it, but who started it. But it was the infusion of all of these people. As an historian, I used to think that revolutions were caused by money and that money drove and economic factors drove things forward. I now know completely differently. A revolution is generated by ideas. And it is when you have lots of ideas that are in collision, that are flowering and being generated, that's irresistible. And your group and ours is generating these ideas that I think are very powerful, and I think they're going to prevail ultimately. I think they've already prevailed. That our species loves these imaginative adventures, these taking on of new identities. This was what theater and literature are all about. You've provided a concrete iteration of that, and we have as well. And so I think the future is going to be um, really quite exciting.
I love that. We could use some optimism. So thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate you taking the time. So what we'll do is we will take this recording, we'll put it on YouTube. We will also summarize it in our newsletter. And we will make sure you mentioned you actually did it for me, so we didn't even have to ask about where to find your book, as well as as well as the consortium, both on Facebook and on the website. So anything else you'd like to
And
share
if you
before we
send me
wrap
the
up?
link, I'll be sure to put it on the Reacting website too.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Well, we're also going to invite you to join. No
Okay?
fees. You should join us. It's pretty clear. And we would ask you to share it with anybody who'd like to join it, put you on our newsletter list. It's a huge opportunity. I think it just makes sense. I don't always do the hard sell for a lot of our guests, but it's, we should be members. We should be family. If the minimum, just so we can stay in touch and
You got it.
support
I'll
your
do that.
work.
Be happy
Excellent.
to
Well, I'll
do it.
send you that link. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. Don't go anywhere, Mark. We will stop the recording and really, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.